Okay, so today we're going to start talking about graphing, but rather than the inputs being in degrees, they're going to be in radians. So from here on out, we're just going to assume that we are in radians. Sorry, I'm making breakfast. It's baking. It just got to temperature. That's why it's beeping. All right, so in the directions for today's notes, it actually says to identify the midline, amplitude, and period. I think identifying those first will help you more accurately graph. And then we just have to remember that instead of like the typical period being 360 degrees, we now just have to switch to the same measurement just in radians, would be 2 pi radians. So the midline we find just the same way. It is the vertical shift, which is y equals 1. And then we need to find the amplitude, which is also in the same exact way, which is 1 in this case. And then the period starts out at 2 pi, and then we're going to shrink it by a factor of 2/3. We're going to compress it by a factor of 2/3. 2 pi times 2/3 is 4 pi over 3. And then our important values, so every max, min, or where it hits the midline, will be a quarter of the way through the period. So if I want to figure out how far apart those are, I'm going to multiply by 1/4, and that means they're going to be pi over 3 apart. And figuring this out, even though it's not required, will help you determine what you should go by on the x-axis for a scale. So I need to know that something important is going to happen every pi over 3. So I'm going to go by pi over 3. Now, one thing I will tell you, if there's a phase shift, we have to also be careful that the important values allow us to easily graph the phase shift as we're determining what the x-axis should go by. But for this one, we're just going to go by pi over 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's pi over 3. There's pi over 3 plus pi over 3, which is 2 pi over 3. 3 pi over 3 is just pi. And then 4 pi over 3. And there's not a phase shift in this case. And so it's going to start at the y-axis. This is a sine graph, so it will start at the midline. So y equals 1, y equals 1. And then it's sine, so it's going to go up 1, back to the midline, down 1. Oops, I didn't actually go down 1. Down 1, back to the midline, and so forth. And if it helped you, it helps me so that my eyes don't play tricks on me to continue to mark the x-axis. I think that's helpful just to graph it accurately, not make little mistakes graphing. It's easier to count along here and then go back and plot all those points. And just like with degrees, it's just continuing the pattern. Because it's a periodic function, it's just going to keep going at the same exact pattern, which makes it nice. And there we go. All right, let's do one more, and I'm probably going to make 2 videos for this lesson just so that I don't run out of time. I'm always limited to 15 minutes when I post, which is why I always make so many different videos. Plus, it's nice that you guys get a break in between them. All right, so now we're going to take a look at a cosine graph in radians. So for this one, the amplitude is 2, and the midline is y equals 0. The period, which starts at 2 pi, is being stretched by a factor of 2. Remember, always take the opposite of what you see. So the period ends up being 4 pi. And then the important values are a quarter of the way through the period. So 1/4 times 4 pi is just pi. So I'm going to pick an interval. It doesn't actually matter. I'm going to say every 4 grid lines is pi. So 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, three. And phase shifts make this a little bit more challenging, but we're not getting into those for this set of notes. We're going to get into those on day 2. So that way you can get a little bit better with the radians and then kind of graduate to graphing with the phase shift also. So cosine starts at the max and then comes down and then goes back up. And then there's that 1, 2, 3, 4 pi. So just to make sure we ended up making the whole curve in 4 pi radians. And there we go. Sketch a nice, pretty smooth curve. And there's 2 graphs for this morning, although it might not be morning when you're watching this. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video and start a new one. Hopefully this is making sense. Always please email me if it's not. Why don't you take a break and then get started on the next video.